Hello, my name is Zhenya Kipperman, and I welcome you to the very first episode of my YouTube channel. I started the channel to share my thoughts about our present, our past, and our future. So for now, it will largely be about Ukraine. I believe that what's happening today in Ukraine is the most important part of our present, and it will largely define our future, the future of the so-called free world. But in order to see the prospects for our future, we usually need to look back. So historic analogies will be an important part of my episodes. I think today more and more people realize that Ukraine is not just fighting for its own survival, but also for our survival. Ukraine forced us to look in the mirror, to realize that we walked away from our core values, that at some point we traded our love for liberty for the cult of comfort. Comfort, too much comfort, makes you weak. Some glorious civilizations of the past vanished because of that. So in a broad historic sense, Ukraine is giving the West a chance to survive. Will the West recognize what's being offered? Will it take the chance? Will our leaders and peoples rise to the occasion? These will be the central questions of my episodes. But there's another urgent question that stems from these big questions. And this is, why is that still the Western help to Ukraine, the military help, is so limited? Why is it so carefully rationed? It's a tough question, and to answer it, it'll take more than one episode. So in the first episode, I'd like to address the psychological aspect of it. I will attempt a brief psychological analysis of our leadership. There are two types of leaders. There are strong leaders who, at a time of crisis and war, rise to the occasion and make history. They act quickly and decisively, they take risks, and they take full responsibility for their hard decisions. And there is a second type, and as I speak, you're welcome to fill this frame with your own candidates. The first priority of these leaders is not doing the job, but keeping the job. They don't act quickly or decisively, they don't take risks. Their thinking patterns are, what if? Wait and see. They prefer talking to acting. They love bureaucracy because it saves them from taking personal responsibility. And they'd rather do nothing than do something big. Unfortunately, most of our leaders today belong to the second type. I'd like to illustrate this difference between the first type of leadership and the second type by a historic example. It's from the Second World War, and it's a disturbing fact that concerns the command of the Allies, of the British and American forces, not the generals, but the governmental officials in charge of the war. In 1944, when it became known for a fact that in Auschwitz thousands and thousands of people are being gassed every day, the Allies did not bomb the camp or the railway tracks to the camp. In 1944, several courageous inmates escaped Auschwitz. They made a report about the unprecedented mass murder that was taking place there. They also provided a detailed map, a plan of the camp. The most important part of their report was their request to bomb the railway tracks from Budapest to Auschwitz, because these tracks were used to transport thousands and thousands of Jews every day to their death. When this report reached Winston Churchill, he immediately wrote to his Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden, I quote, "Is there any reason to raise this matter with the cabinet? Get anything out of the Air Force you can and invoke me if necessary." So Churchill bypassed the cabinet. He didn't go to the cabinet because they would debate the issue for weeks, maybe months. Churchill ordered the Air Force to act right away. And Eden immediately conveyed this order to Minister of Air Sir Archibald Sinclair. And it took Archibald Sinclair 2 weeks to respond. Now, in Auschwitz, every day, thousands of people were killed. And it took Sinclair 2 weeks to respond. And in his response, he said that bombing the railway tracks leading to Auschwitz would be costly and hazardous. But he would be happy to pass the request to Americans. And he did. The request to bomb the railway tracks or the camp itself was forwarded to the American Undersecretary of the War, John McCloy. And McCloy had been already approached multiple times with the same request by the Jewish leaders. If we count only official documented requests that reached his desk, there were 5. He rejected all of them. Despite the fact that the commander of the American Strategic Air Force in Europe, General Spaatz, and the American Air Force commander, General Eaker, were both fully supportive of bombing Auschwitz and the railways. General Eaker said, "We can do it and we should do it." But John McCloy told his assistant, "Kill the request." Meaning just bury it under the paper, under the pile of paper. After the 5th request, McCloy responded that bombing could only be done by diverting essential air support from vital operations. He also said that bombing may provoke even more vindictive actions by the Germans. That's a quote. Can you think of a more vindictive action than what they have been doing in Auschwitz? What John McCloy was actually saying, in the language of our contemporary leaders, that if we bomb Auschwitz and the railways, it might lead to an escalation. So both John McCloy and Archibald Sinclair were the leaders of the second type. I'd like to end my historic analogy with 2 quotes. The first one is from Winston Churchill, when he learned for a fact that mass murder was happening in the camps of death. He wrote to Eden, "There is no doubt that this is probably the greatest and most horrible crime ever committed in the whole history of the world, and it has been done by scientific machinery, by nominally civilized men, in the name of a great state and one of the leading races in Europe. It is quite clear that all concerned in this crime who may fall into our hands, including the people who only obeyed orders by carrying out the butcheries, should be put to death after their association with the murderers has been proved." I think that this quote is a great lesson for our contemporary leaders in terms of the rhetoric appropriate for the war crimes. If only their statements in regard to the war crimes of Putin's regime in Ukraine were as specific, as direct as Churchill's in terms of defining the crime and the punishment, then the number of the soldiers participating in these crimes and the number of officers allowing or encouraging them would go down, simply out of fear of punishment. And the second quote is from historian David Wyman, one of the leading experts on the Holocaust in the world. Wyman wrote, and it's a question, "How could it be that the governments of the 2 great Western democracies knew that a place existed where 2,000 helpless human beings could be killed every 30 minutes, knew that such killings actually did occur over and over again, and yet did not feel driven to search for some way to wipe such scourge from the earth?" It's a hard question, but this Wyman's hard question is a historic challenge only for those few who knew what was going on, had the power to do something about it, and chose not to. So his question is for Archibald Sinclair and John McCloy, not for the general public, because in 1944 the general public at large did not know about Auschwitz and other camps of death. But today is different. The question, why aren't we doing more for Ukraine, is meant not only for the leaders, but for millions of people, because today we all know what's going on. We see war crimes of Putin's regime every day. We know about bombing schools and hospitals, about tortures, rapes, murders, besieged cities, mass graves. We know about thousands of forcibly deported to Russia, about millions of refugees in Europe. We know about all that. So part of responsibility is on us. So we need to demand from our leaders to do more for Ukraine, because as General Eaker said, we can do it and we should do it. At the end of October, a group of progressive Democrats sent a letter to President Biden urging him to enter into direct diplomatic talks with Putin. They withdrew this shameful appeasement letter within 24 hours. Why? Because of the public pressure. Because of the people like you and me. However unconcerned with the judgment of history, they are concerned with the judgment of voters. At the end of the Second World War, the chief architect of the Holocaust, the creator of the SS troops and concentration camps, Heinrich Himmler, tried to enter into separate peace talks with England and the United States behind Hitler's and Stalin's backs. Churchill writes in his memoirs, "We repulsed his offer." So the Allies were repulsed, were sickened by the idea of entering or even discussing a possibility of negotiations with one of the key war criminals of the Nazi Germany. How come today's politicians are not sickened by the idea of entering into negotiations with Vladimir Putin? Some signatories of this appeasement letter that went to Biden and what was withdrawn within 24 hours, they said, "Oh, I signed this letter a long time ago. I signed it in June, and it was supposed to go out in July, not in October. In October, the situation is entirely different." But the graphic images of the Bucha massacre hit the world on April 1st. The siege of Mariupol ended in May with over 20,000 killed and 95% of the city completely destroyed. The signatories of this letter knew about this when they were signing it in June or July. And President Macron, who urged European leaders not to humiliate Putin, he knew that Putin is a war criminal. People who think that Realpolitik has to be immoral are mistaken. The immoral Realpolitik led to this war. The immoral Realpolitik made the West appease all Putin's previous wars and annexations. The immoral Realpolitik made us dependent on Putin's oil and gas. The isolationists who see this war as yet another distant conflict that has nothing to do with American national interests are also mistaken. Yes, there were quite a few unnecessary, plain stupid wars in American history, but this one is different. Fighting Hitler was not only moral, it was also vital for American national interests. Same with Putin. Crushing Putin in Ukraine is vital for the future of this planet. In March, 3 weeks after this war began, I started writing a book called Ukraine 2022, The Test for the West. Recently, I began publishing selected chapters on Substack. I'd appreciate your subscriptions, free subscriptions, and comments there. Also, I edited a few chapters as a short, punchy opinion pieces ready for publication, so if you know of any media outlet that could be interested, please let me know. I also put excerpts from my book on Facebook and Twitter. The best way to reach me is through Facebook Messenger. I want to thank my friend Sasha Verbitsky for the great design work for the channel. And thank you all for watching and for your support. See you next time. Slava Ukraini!